Hello, everyone. Welcome to the SafeHouse, brought to you by the SafeHouse Initiative. I'm Jeff Edwards, co-chair of the SafeHouse Initiative, and your host for today's podcast. AI, it's on the lips of everyone. It's on the minds of everyone to embrace it or to not embrace it. And so today we're going to delve into the aspects, the human nature of AI, really. And boy, I tell you what, you're going to be in for a real treat today, folks. We have the CEO and co-founder of Harmonic Security, Alastair Patterson, is with us today. Alastair, welcome to the Safe House.
Jeff, great to speak with you today. Thanks for having me on the show.
No, it's a real honor and a pleasure. And since it's your first time on the Safe House, why don't we get acquainted? Why don't you acquaint yourself with the audience? Kind of talk about kind of your journey and how you ended up here, because you have a fascinating journey, quite frankly.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, as you can tell from the accent, I started out in the UK, so I kind of grew up there and went through the education system there. But I pretty quickly got into cybersecurity and the startup environment, and I set up my first company in the UK, Digital Shadows, which was in the threat intelligence space. And so that was kind of my, I guess a big part of my life over the 11 years. Started just kind of two of us around a kitchen table in London, but I'm speaking to you now from San Francisco because I was fortunate to raise some money in Silicon Valley, and I moved out here 10 years ago now in 2015. So now on the US side of things, and speaking to you from the Bay Area.
How was that transition? Just curious.
Yeah, it was fantastic for me and for the business. Of course, there's nowhere better in the world to build a company still than Silicon Valley. San Francisco has its issues, of course, but I'm really bullish on it. I love it over here. I'm now a dual national. I've married an American. I've got kids and in a house here, so I'm all in on it. And but I've kept the UK ties as well, and we've got for my new company Harmonic, we have a strong engineering team there in King's Cross in London.
Yeah, no, it's I tell you, I lived in Silicon Valley in the 90s and the early 2000s, and I loved it. So glad you made the transition. So AI, what is it that you attracted you to AI to begin with? Just curious.
Yeah, so I mentioned previously I was working at Digital Shadows. We got acquired in July of 22, and I mentioned it'd been a long journey. We built that up to 500 customers and offices around the world, and so I suddenly went from managing a big team to having a bit more time on my hands, and that was just as ChatGPT was unveiled on the world around November of 22. And I just thought what a transformational moment it was. I think it's the closest thing to magic I've seen as an adult. Was my first kind of interactions with it. I could just see how extraordinary it was, and the potential for that technology to change the world. And so I think my wife was sort of hoping I take a bit of time out and rest for a little while, but I sort of quickly realized I'd need to get building again, because this was just too exciting, and there were so many opportunities to use the technology, and then also as a security guy by background, I started thinking of the risks and the consequences as well, and how can we harness it safely, I guess, which was what's motivated Harmonic.
What are some of the things that you've discovered with working at Harmonic, and just the kind of the human nature side, and the kind of the knee-jerk reactions that take place, especially for small businesses, for instance, for adoption or for even entertaining it?
I think this is a really profound shift. I mean, I think people have been trying to figure out how big this change is. We've all, at least those of us old enough have lived through the internet coming along, and then there's the cloud and mobile. But I think this shift is probably bigger than cloud and mobile, at least from my perspective. It's right up there, and in terms of impact on companies around the world. And I think it's kind of paramount for people to be thinking about it and understanding how it's going to affect them, both as individuals and for those in companies, how it's going to affect their industries, and that those changes are going to be felt in quite uneven ways, because of the nature of that technology. It's really good and going to change a lot of things, and then it's not so good in other areas, as those of us who've played around a bit know. So, but what I'd stress is this is definitely not just a hype bubble. I mean, there is a hype bubble around it. Don't get me wrong, but it's very real, right? And I see it every day in how we're using it, but also in how the companies we're working with are using it, and individuals, right? I was talking to my dad the other day. He's now in his 80s, and he's even using ChatGPT at this point, which astounded me. So yeah, I think what often is sometimes missed by companies is that even if you don't know that it's happening, employees are for sure going to be trying out and using these tools, both at home and often at work.
Yeah, so that's a good point then. So as a business owner, I know my employees are probably trying it. I don't want them to. Do you see a lot of companies saying, "Oh, I'm going to block this," or try to prevent this, or are they embracing it? Or is it all over the map?
Yeah, it varies dramatically, and I think that the biggest determinant is probably the industry, and so when we're working with highly regulated companies in particular, but financial services, the banks, healthcare, they tend to be the most risk adverse, and they default to trying to really block the use of tools like ChatGPT and the many others out there, that their employees may want to use on the more consumer company side. Tech companies, earlier stage companies, they tend to be leaning in more, wanting to enable their employees, and they probably face fewer consequences perhaps of problems with it. And I get it. I guess though, I think things are moving so fast here that even the companies that are trying to block it, they are probably not actually blocking it in practice, because employees are finding ways around, right? They may be disabling controls or using their own devices. I had an interesting conversation the other day with it's the CISO of a bank that we're working with, and before we got involved there, he had an issue where one of his employees was emailing things to himself at home, his home address, then running them through AI tools, and then emailing the output of those tools back into the workplace. And so going to pretty extraordinary lengths to get around the security measures that have been put in place to stop the tool use. But in doing that, of course, the sensitive data is getting sent off the company site and into personal accounts, which is obviously just a terrible way to have an organization operating. We wouldn't recommend that, of course.
So in terms of the usage, I mean, that individual in particular, was he sent it to his home so he can get around the system internally, but was he using it to say, okay, I want to put this through as like an editor of the and find a better way to articulate my message, my email, and so I look smarter when I get back to work and send this email out? Is that what he was doing?
That was one of the use cases. Yeah, I mean, what we see that it's kind of getting into all kinds of areas now. I mean, these AI tools are really good at data analysis. You can also just feed them a ton of unstructured data and reports, and then you want to distill out what are the key points from it. It can do that extraordinarily well, and that's just the starting point, right? As these tools are getting linked together and becoming more sophisticated, there's very few facets of work that are not going to be touched by them.
Are you finding that so I mean, there's so many different ways you can employ this. I mean, the use cases, and you are more security focused with your company. Is that true or not true?
Yeah, I mean, I think where we're coming in with Harmonic, I mean, we see this tension in almost every enterprise we go into, and the tension is essentially that the business wants to charge forward and adopt AI as fast as possible, because the CTOs and the CEOs are saying that to the markets or to their boards, and they don't want to lose a competitive advantage because they see their competitors adopting it and so on. They see ways of driving more efficiency and lowering cost and improving performance. But at the same time, you've got legal, privacy, compliance that are taking a look at this and saying, well, hey, what's the risk here, and how are we going to be exposing ourselves? And so I'm really, Harmonic's trying to sit in the middle of that conversation and enable the safe use of AI without the risk of sensitive data leaking out into places it shouldn't go. And the way that we're doing that is by using AI ourselves, to your point, for security purposes, which is, I think the great duality of this technology. It poses some risks, but actually we can use it to solve a bunch of risks in security as well. And we should be looking at that and leaning into it in all the areas, not just in data protection where Harmonic's focused.
So all this activity is happening with or without consent, or if you're trying to block it, you probably just be smarter as a business owner, say, okay, let's try to embrace it intelligently. Would the first thing you do would be what? Create a policy of some sort, or some, kind of a usage parameters? Is that how you'd recommend to start?
That's right. I mean, I think the step one, and most companies have done this at this point, is to establish some sort of policy that's saying, hey, look, here's how we want to use AI. Here's what's okay and what isn't okay. So the most common thing would be, please don't put our customer data into an AI engine that's not been approved by the business. So that's often a step one. The problem with policies is, of course, that nobody reads them, and it's people just carry on with their jobs, as we all know, unfortunately, in security. And so the part two is usually getting visibility. We'd recommend as the next step. And there are various ways you can do that. I mean, we obviously focus on it, but most businesses have some sort of SASE or web gateway tools in place, and they can get some kind of rudimentary understanding, at least from those, of how AI is being used. You can sort of see the category of AI and which teams and users are going at it. On the Harmonic side, we dig into the actual prompt data itself to show, what are the use cases that the company needs, because I think that is always illuminating. You can kind of see, well, okay, and within the marketing organization, they're using these 6 or 7 tools. Why are they using those? And do we want to put an enterprise agreement around some of those that we don't today, because they're actually critical? And it sort of sparks those business conversations, which I think are what we need to drive it, not just starting with security. It's like, hey, what are we trying to do with AI right now, and how can we put the right guardrails and around it to enable the business? And then the third step is control, right? So how do we actually ensure that the policy is being adhered to and stop our sensitive data leaking out? And there's a lot of ways that you can historically look at that, and that's but it's pretty challenging, right? So there's rolling out classic DLP programs that are full of false positives and effort for security teams. So we see a lot of people struggling with that, but certainly in the banks, they've usually had a go at implementing that. Then there's the data labeling solutions, so Microsoft Purview and so on. The goal being, hey, if you label all your data, you can spot the sensitive stuff going out. That we see as being a real struggle for most businesses. And given your audience, I think there's that's a tough one for anyone who's not a big institution with a lot of security people to throw at it. And then I think the other option companies go with, unfortunately, is blocking, right? They just say, well, hey, look, here's a secure AI, like maybe we've got an enterprise agreement with ChatGPT, so go and use that, and we'll try to block everything else. But the problem is, as we said, is that employees find ways around it, and it's easy to think, well, I just need to care about ChatGPT and maybe it's Claude, Gemini, and Perplexity or something like that, the most common ones. But we just published some new research today showing that the average company is using 254 AI apps, most of which are unmanaged.
Whoa! I'm sorry to interrupt. How many?
254. That's the average. So there's some real outliers in there. We're tracking more than 6,000 now in total, and there's new ones every week. And they cover all kinds of business use cases. So just to give you one example, because I was looking at it last night, but there's a new set of tools that are springing up and are looking at generating slides automatically for you. And so you can paste in some corporate data, maybe a document, some sort of outline of notes, and then you can kind of hit go, and it will go and produce a beautiful PowerPoint for you that complete with imagery that it can generate. And so within that, just that little subcategory, there's a whole bunch of companies. So Gamma is one of the most popular, that has millions of users. But there's Slides AI, SlideSpeak, Presentify, StoryD, Beautiful AI. right? There's more where that came from, right? Just in that subcategory of AI for generating presentations. And so kind of for across the enterprise, there's thousands of these applications covering all these different areas, and most enterprises are unaware that their employees are even using them. And you can kind of say, well, it's similar to SaaS, which is the risks around use of SaaS, which is true. But I think the difference this time is that these things are so compelling because they're automatically doing people's jobs and saving them a ton of time. And I'm there for that. I think that's great. But the risk is that you've suddenly got this unmanaged sprawl of shadow AI, with data flying around. So yeah, really, really interesting to see that evolution so quickly in this space.
Well, so you got all these things going on. So on average, 254 apps out there, AI apps, and they have a free version and they also have a licensed version, correct? On all those, mostly.
Mostly, that's right. Yeah, most of them will give you some sort of free trial, and you can start firing your data into it. And of course, part of the risk is there that you are the product potentially, because they may train on that data.
That's my very question, because the measure of a person are the questions they ask, right? And so it's kind of like tipping your hand. If it's on the free version, that's free game for anyone to have access to, and it trains the model that anyone can use. Is that true or not true? Because I'm asking out of my own ignorance mostly.
Yeah, it's definitely application specific, but a lot of them will absolutely train on the data. A Gamma, the first one I mentioned, the most popular one for slide generation, I believe does. Their terms and conditions. I mean, the most popular one of all, ChatGPT, does in the free edition, right? If you're using the free one, then your prompts are going in there, and they can use that data to train their models with. Now, there's questions around, is that, how big a risk is that to you? Of course, and maybe it all gets kind of jumbled in there and never comes out again. But certainly if it was my critical IP and customer lists and things like that, it's something you probably don't want to mess with. And, the regulators are getting pretty hot on this stuff as well as the supply chain, right? Whenever we do business now, there seems to be questions about, which AI are you using? Where's our data going to go if we give it to you? Which is really, really interesting. And I think the other thing in our survey that's maybe the most interesting stat is, of all of the prompts that we see going into these AI apps, it's around 7% that contain sensitive data. So that may not sound like a lot, but it is when you look at the quantity that's going in and the types of data we see. There's a lot of anecdotes there.
Well, that's interesting, because I think some of these perceptions of the free version of, like, I don't want to give away my IP basically, and my strategic view of the world. And I think that's probably a barrier for some of the business owners in a small business that are not very well educated, like myself, that would say, "Ooh, I'm not going to do that." That's why they're blocking it. Is that maybe one of the big drivers there?
Yeah, exactly. It's and I think it's, there's folk in the workplace who do think about that themselves, and they're worried about it, and they're personally maybe reluctant to use those tools for fear of leaking data. But there's also a newer generation coming into the workforce that's just adopting them just as you would Google, right? And they just see it as part of life, that they use these tools all day long in their personal life, and they expect to do so at work, and they don't understand why there'd be a problem. So I think it's a really interesting transition as the workplace is evolving, and new graduates are coming in alongside people that might be more worried about the risk. I guess we saw some of that in the mobile era and the cloud era. There were people who were saying, well, hey, look, I'm never going to put my data in the cloud, right? And then now, of course, we all do. And people that were very against the use of personal devices for work email, but many companies allow that now. And those changes have come in pretty fast. And I think this AI wave is just coming even faster than any of those prior ones.
Yeah. All right. So I'm a business owner. I'm sitting here and I go, okay, I'm coming to grips with the fact that my employees are using it. I really can't block them. So let's build out a policy and say, okay, here's how we're going to play. But now I need to know how to embrace it and how to implement it in an organized fashion. Like, are there frameworks that exist, and which, is there one, or is there more than one?
Yeah, I think it's actually very challenging at the moment. So the Cloud Security Alliance, I think, has something like 200 different frameworks on
Oh,
their website
wow.
for AI risk management, and MITRE has one, and of course there's a Gartner view, and so on and so on. And I think the problem is that a lot of them are written to cover the broad scope of all risks to do with AI, including if you're developing and building your own solutions and how to protect those and all the risks associated with that. I actually think for the average small medium business, just the new version of the NIST's framework,
Yeah.
not even their AI framework, but just the standard risk management framework is actually really good for thinking about AI, because they've added a kind of governance section in the latest edition of that, and I
Yeah.
think that's actually kind of the best way to think about AI adoption, as well as is through that lens,
Yeah.
because I think we can get all caught up in a lot of theoretical attacks that are mostly to do with deploying your own apps and models, and if you are, then I think that's very important. But I think for most of us, it's actually more, it's back to the basics of how do we want our organization to use this technology?
Yeah.
What's okay and not okay? How do we put some controls around our data moving, which is typically the biggest challenge that we see for most companies is that fear of sensitive data leaking out. So yeah, I can see we have some materials around that as well, Jeff, that we could try and make available to you for the SafeHouse initiative as well.
Well, yeah, and we're really pleased that you become a contributor to the Safe House. We greatly appreciate it. It's you're really the first AI company that has joined in our mission. So we greatly appreciate it and warmly welcome. And also, NIST is how we kind of think of the world as from frameworks. And Daniel Elliott at NIST is going to be very pleased, Alistair, with you for recommending the risk management. And I'm glad you said that too, because it's like, yeah, it really is quite a good piece of work there.
It really is. That CSF, I think, is just a great starting point for almost everybody. And so we've got a paper where we've mapped Gen AI controls to that framework, and like how do we think about Gen AI within that context. So we'll put that up on the SafeHouse initiative with you guys.
Yeah. Well, so Alistair, we covered quite a bit of ground today, but usually I ask, what are the recommendations you'd have to, something you could do today of all my guests, but I think I want to take this a little bit different today, because Alan Jen, who's my partner in crime when it comes to this, and also our software company, the Safe House Initiative, and also our software company. He really is embracing and as a student of AI and how to use it better. And he has some mentors that he looks to. And so he asked some questions that he never would thought of to ask AI, or how to think about using AI. And it's really helped him tremendously. So in a way, you're almost like a mentor for our audience, if you're so willing to come back, answer some questions. I know we're going to get a lot of questions, and audience out there, send in questions. If Alistair is willing to come back, Alistair, we're willing to come back and answer some more questions, and now also have another conversation about how to get started as an individual.
Absolutely. Yeah. Would love to come back and answer any questions that I can, and help wherever I can with the initiative here. So yeah, be my pleasure.
Alistair, I tell you, what a great conversation. The time flew on this, and boy, I can't wait for this our next session.
Likewise. No, we can spend hours on this one.
Sure. All right. Well, if we have to go more than one session, we shall. And if you're willing to do it, we'll do multiple episodes. We've done it before. That's our podcast for today. I'm Jeff Edwards for the Safe House Initiative. Thanks for joining us. And remember, be safe, be resilient, and be kind to each other. For more information about the SafeHouse Initiative, please use your mobile device to scan the QR code on the screen, or send us an email at info@safehouseinitiative.org, or visit us on our website, safehouseinitiative.org. We look forward to hearing from you.